find out more. You can find out more about her on the WIOGEN website. I will share the link. And she is also the person who really made WIOGEN a reality. So it's very exciting to have her join us here today to discuss Science for Future, structural limitations of a global science system and the global challenges. Thank you so much, Anna-Katharina, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Shannon, and it's really an honor and pleasure to be here with you today. Very nice to meet all of you again, and yeah, catch up basically and continue a conversation that we started already a while ago. And Shannon, I think I heard some seagulls in the background. It sounded very nice. No?
It's a kitten.
Ah, it's very cute. Very nice. All right. I share my, let me just get the technology so set up. Hang on. So I think that is working. Can you see the slides? Yeah. Yeah. All right. So Science for Future. I decided or thought that it might be of interest to share a little bit sort of partly what we are also working here at DIE with you, partly reflect jointly with you on the global science system a little, which is of course of relevance to WIOGEN and to the considerations of how to build basically or contribute to the building of a science system that enables transformative change. And if we look at the world today, we know it's characterized by a number of global mega trends. The image here depicts 8 altogether, and we argue at the German Development Institute that we have to distinguish global megatrends of the first and of the second order. So we argue, we observe since a number of centuries large scale trends that we as humanity build up, contribute to, but that also build up over a long period of time and then guide action in a way and guide decision makers in a way that they shape structures, they shape institutional structures, they shape material infrastructures, how we build our cities, how we build our coastlines, for instance, that limit and define and also limit the ability for us to act and shape future. So future is already predetermined in many ways by the structural consequences of these global megatrends. And we distinguish here those of the first order that are even more sort of laying the structures for then also the dynamics to unfold between those megatrends of the first order and the second order, and the dynamics that the different megatrends unfold between each other. So we argue that climate change and resource deprivation, geopolitical power shifts and demographic change are global megatrends of the first order, while then there are megatrends of the second order, such as urbanization, the rise of social inequalities and the increase of social inequalities and the rise of new middle classes, digitalization and knowledge society, so the role of knowledge and technology in transformational processes, globalization versus regionalization, and migratory movements. And then you see this in a simplified manner, these scenarios, and we argue, well, as a heuristic tool, it can be helpful to think about what are actually extreme scenarios, binary extreme scenarios that are likely to unfold depending on how we steer these global megatrends and how we let them sort of go wild, or how we rein them in through our governance mechanisms. And we argue that in scenario A, we are in a situation by 2050 where world population basically amounts to roughly 9 billion, roughly 9 billion. We have managed to restrict global warming to around 1.5, but basically under 2 degrees. We are in a situation where We have decentralized governance structures that are nevertheless coming together on the multilateral level to reflect on the global common good and on necessary governance for the global common good. And scenario set is sort of the binary opposite. There we are around, we have exceeded global warming beyond 3 degrees. We have a world population of around 12 billion people, and we are in a governance situation where we have several poles, a multipolar system, but substantially characterized by destructive competition between different regime types. And I would like to now sort of take 3 of these global megatrends and look at them in a little more detail, and then reflect on the role of science in dealing with these and in making a difference for shaping the dynamics that unfold between them. And the first one I will look at is climate change. And here I'll draw on a study that we just recently handed over to the Minister of Germany of Development Cooperation, Development Policy, Minister Müller. And that is freely downloadable if it's of interest. But basically the main message here is sustainable global development remains unreachable if the Paris goals are not met, if you don't manage to sort of limit global warming to underneath 2 degrees. And if you look at the emissions by income groups, by countries sorted according to income groups, then of course we know that the emissions per capita remain highest in high income countries per capita, but in total they have started to slowly decrease in high income countries, while in transition economies such as China, India, Brazil, South Africa, they continue to rise and have exceeded the emission levels of high income economies since 2007. And it's clear that, and that sort of makes it or reminds us of the fact again that while Germany has to decarbonize its economy, it's responsible for roughly 3% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. It's also clear we will not win the fight against climate change if we don't support the large transition economies and find ways of aligning policies with the large transition economies. So basically it's the large transition economies that in the end take on quite a game changer, a role as game changers, and many high income economies have to support here, find ways of supporting the attempts to decarbonize their economies. And if you then look a little further and look at the sectors that are especially greenhouse gas intensive, then we first of all see that, of course, the energy sector is the transformational field, the transformational sector where a lot of CO2 or a lot of gain can be made by transforming it to CO2 neutral energy production. But the other, especially greenhouse gas emission intensive sectors, are agriculture, forestry, and other land use, as well as industry. And it's the industry and the energy sector that continue to increase also in terms of GHG intensity. If we then look at how the climate financing that exists globally is facilitating or is also is addressing the different sustainable development goals, then we observe that while some of these goals are especially addressed, such as I have to look it up because it's too small here on the screen to see, for me, such as Goal 7, the energy goal, but also Goal 11, for instance, cities, or also the Goal 2, zero hunger, or Goal 15 on land, living on land, life on land, sorry. They are addressed through the climate financing, international climate financing, but then there are a number of sustainable development goals that hardly play a role in how we spend the climate funds. And these are, or the ones that are especially relevant here to mention are the goals equal education, the goals that foster decent work. Again, I have to look it up. Sorry, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, responsible consumption and production. And why are they so important to the transition of our economies? Well, they're important because these fields act as transitional levers, as transformational levers. Yeah, so if you follow the Global Sustainable Development Report, or also what the SDSN, the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, put forth, then we think about what are the fields, the transformational fields that are especially greenhouse gas intense, and have to be basically transformed into CO2 neutral or greenhouse gas neutral energy production, etc. And what are the transformational levers through which that can be achieved? And the role of education, of science, of innovations, of finances, sustainable finances, is clear. So it's of course here relevant to point out that if you then look at the use of climate financing in achieving and contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals, the transformational fields are addressed, but not the transformational levers. Now, moving away from climate change only to resource degradation, we see, and that's here a reference to West Africa, we see in the data of the FAO, were basically brought together by colleagues over 50 years. We see that the increase in competition between large-scale fisheries and small-scale fisheries, and this is no news to you, leads to levels of impoverishment, or to processes of impoverishment. So we here see that, of course, resource management is closely connected with SDG 2, zero hunger, but also with decent work conditions and the SDG that looks at responsible consumption and production. Now, these are sort of climate change, resource degradation are both mega trends that can be regarded as ecological, climatological mega trends. I would like to now bring in one example of a more socio-political mega trend, and that's the mega trend of global power shifts and autocratization processes. And here we observe basically that we are by now in a third wave of autocratization. We've seen in the past 10 years autocracies to take power all over the globe, actually on all continents. They have been on the rise, and what is special to this third wave of autocratization is the gradual erosion of democratic principles and civil liberties. So what we have to keep in mind by now when we reflect on political regimes and how a democracy versus an autocracy, for instance, reflects on climate change mitigation and thinks about designing governance mechanisms that fight the biodiversity crisis, for instance, then we have to keep in mind that by now 2/3 of the world population live in autocracies, in authoritarian systems. Now, when we now sort of take the next step and ask, well, what's the role of science and of the global science system in enabling us to, in enabling world society, to put it that way, in dealing with these grand global challenges, then I think it's important to first of all remind ourselves of the fact that there is not one global science system. Yeah? But when we look at the science systems, globally speaking, we look at here, this is of course only one perspective on science systems, and it's the perspective on how are they funded, how are they financed. Then we see, well, they're financed and funded in a very diverse manner. We have those science systems such as in the European Union, that the European Union aims at spending 3% of its GDP for research and development, for financing science systems. The African Union, for instance, aims at investing 1% of the GDP of its member states into science systems. And we have systems such as Indonesia, for instance, which is a G20 country that invests 0.2% of its GDP into its science system, or countries such as Nigeria that invests 0.1%. So the value that is being attached to the role of science and scientific capacity in acting as an engine for not just economic growth, but for processes of change, for facilitating modernization processes, and facilitating, of course, and also the transformation of our economies and of our production and consumption systems, varies, and it varies substantially, and it also translates into varying capacities of scientific capacity. We have highly diverse the way the systems are organized. Some are very disciplinarily organized, some are disciplinarily organized but only finance particular disciplines. So social sciences might not be financed because they're politically too critical. Others are more thematically organized. That varies a lot. The degree to which basic research versus applied research is valued also varies a lot. So there's a number of other criteria that one can look at, but just to make the point, here, the scientific capacity, globally speaking, varies substantially. And while, of course, the diversity that also comes with the fact that science systems are nationally organized largely and very few are regionally organized, such as in the European Union, that's, of course, a positive aspect, the diversity that comes from this national organization of science systems. But the downside of it is that the ability as a world society to come together and basically be able to speak and negotiate on a comparable level of knowledge and expertise is hampered. And it means that we have a very good, that for instance, data series that give us an insight into climatic changes or how global climate change plays out on the local level, substantially vary from region to region, which also hampers our ability to then think into the future. The same holds true, and even more so in terms of data series with regard to social and economic change processes. So the steering capacity is limited by the fact that how we know the world, how we know the interaction between ecological and socio-political, socio-economic change processes varies substantially between different world regions, and with regards to also the granularity, you could say, intensity of these data. If we then look at the most recent report of the International Science Council, entitled Unleashing Science, then the Science Council, first of all, criticizes that only 2 to 10% of the global funds that go into the financing of science systems actually are channeled through multilateral mechanisms. Yeah? So again, the largest bulk of research and development funds are channeled through strengthened national systems. They're organized by taking the nation state and national science systems into the foreground. And that, of course, means that researchers from underfunded science systems have very little opportunity to then apply to global calls where researchers from all over the world can apply to. Yeah? So organizations such as the Belmont Forum, Future Earth, they are attempts, also IPCC, partly IPBEST, they are attempts of bringing the representatives of globally all science systems and the different disciplines together in order to create a joint knowledge basis for then the respective negotiations on the UN level with regard to climate politics or biodiversity politics. But we also know that initiatives such as the Belmont Forum Initiative, Future Earth, they lack funds, yeah, because of the tendency to use science research and development funds by national governments for very nationally oriented agenda setting processes, or at least keep the finger on who determines what is being researched and how it's being researched, how it's also then later on being processed for political decision taking. And the diagram that I'm illustrating here on that slide goes further and says, well, there are 6 conditions of system change that basically that depend on each other and have to be reflected on when reflecting on how transformational processes can actually be pushed forward, facilitated through science. I won't go into detail here now, but I think my main point here is, and I might refer you to some data that were portrayed recently in the internationalization strategy of Germany that draws on OECD data that basically say, well, 60% of the global research and development funds are being invested within the OECD country context, 60%. Then another 30% in China. And then the remaining 10%, that is basically supporting the science systems of the rest of the world. So there's a substantial discrepancy in how we know the world, and that, of course, then plays out in our capacities. And this is here using the COVID-19 vaccine discussion as an example, what kind of effects the fragmented global science system have. This is a diagram produced by The Economist. It just portrays, it calculates basically when are different world regions being vaccinated. And what it reminds us basically of the situation that those regions that have the research, the scientific capacity to develop vaccines themselves or to produce them, or to import them and basically provide the logistics for vaccination, are those that are being vaccinated first. In Africa, 99% of the vaccines being used, not just COVID-19 vaccines, but all vaccines, continue to be imported into the continent, and that has an effect. And while, of course, we probably all read the news that BioNTech is now opening up production capacities in Rwanda, and similar discussions exist, negotiations exist with South Africa with regard to COVID-19 vaccines now. That's an important step. These are important steps to build up the development, and then later, or the production, but then hopefully also later the development capacities for vaccines and for other healthcare products on the African continent. But it still shows us that science systems, it makes a difference whether you have invested into whether regions bring the scientific capacity to enable sort of the adaptive capacities of a society in dealing with future crises or not. It reminds us of the importance of scientific knowledge and also non-scientific knowledge in change adaptation. And I want to here then also draw on one example. Some of you might know it, some work that we did together with Stefan Partelo in the lead, looking at basically publications that were so basically peer-reviewed journal articles that were to be found on the Web of Science. Limitation was English language articles only, articles that publish on tropical coasts with a sustainability lens. Now, that was the articles we looked at and classified them, and then looked at where are the research regions located, where are the donors financing that research located, where are the first author countries located. And you see the web here. You see that many of the first authors lie outside of, or first author countries lie outside of the research regions, which has an impact on who sets the agenda for the research, who sets the agenda, who implements the agenda, and how that then translates into the local fit of the research done, where that actually fits the local context, and not just the local context ecologically speaking, but is then also sort of being translated basically into the political networks, into the societal situations of the different regions where the research takes place. So there's, in a simplified manner, one could say, still a very strong tendency to research about and not with each other. Yeah. Now, what does that mean for reflecting on policy making for sustainable development? That's a topic that is particularly of interest at the moment within the German context, because we are just after an election and in the midst of 3 parties negotiating a coalition agreement. So I won't go into too much detail into this slide. We've sort of put together 7 principles for future German development policy, but I wanted to simply share it with you, 2 aspects from these, because Germany continues to be the 2nd largest bilateral donor in the field of development cooperation, and at the same time hardly actually does not invest into joint scientific knowledge production between European researchers and researchers from other regions. That falls under the research ministry. At the same time, the research ministry does not invest into that field, into these type of collaborations with a capacity building focus as much. So there is a bit of a gap. WIOGEN is financed through BMZ funds. So in many ways, that's sort of an example where ways could be found to some degree to overcome these limitations in the funding regulations. But I think it can be used also as a case to reflect on the limitations of how research funds are being administered, and how much how we again and again meet our limitations when when not finding other means of financing research. So basically, what I'm thinking about is there are attempts of different donors from different world regions to come together and then announce calls. I think that's the way to go for the future. But at the moment, we are still very far away from it, at least within the context of research financing from German ministries. And I want to point to 2 of these 7 principles to guide German development policy in the future, mainly that we argue for investing a lot more into the multilateral instruments of development cooperation. So rather than using the funds as means of building bilateral relationships between Germany and particular singular countries, rather invest into the UN system and with this strengthen a multilateral and strengthen our governance mechanisms on the multilateral level in order to address global challenges. We need a strong multilateral system. And the second point is that we argue for widening the country focus of German development policy and also include basically large transition economies and OECD countries in it in order to enable development policy and also development research that actually takes into account that it's the large transition economies that are game changers in dealing with the global challenges ahead and with the dynamics that develop between the different global megatrends that I mentioned at the beginning. And with this, I come to my last slide, and that's picking up basically once again the idea or the heuristic structure of identifying what are the fields for action, the transformational fields, and what are the transformative levers. And it's clear that the transformative fields or the fields for action are on the one side our economies, the decarbonization of our economies. It lies in the strengthening of the social security systems, including healthcare systems, in democracy protection by now and peace building, and in facilitating climate just urbanization processes. The transformative levers lie within the field of finances, governance, and political will, and of course then education, science, and innovation systems. And I hope it came across that I'm convinced of the fact that if we continue to marginalize science and innovation systems as actual instruments and instruments for enabling transformative change processes, that has substantial consequences, because we have a situation where the global challenges have to be addressed by world society together. But this world society then also has to have a basis, a joint knowledge basis, where we come together, where we can work with each other, where we stand in a trusted dialogue with each other, as you live it in WIOGEN, and can then advise the governance and steering mechanisms on the multilateral level out of the perspective of the expertise, the scientific expertise out of many different world regions. No? That's a lot more powerful than if a few European researchers or North American researchers only advise the UN, because the UN it represents the world, and thus is also interested in knowing that the advice that they receive has been produced based on the expertise from many different world regions and is being fed into the science to policy networks in these respective world regions again, and not always just in very few. With this, I end, and I'm looking forward to your remarks and questions and discussion points. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Anna-Katharina. Hopefully we have some questions and discussion, because that's really inspired some thoughts. So the floor is open. If you would like to, you can raise your hand and unmute, and we will we'll take questions from the floor. I know Rebecca has a question for you, so I'm going to pick on Rebecca to unmute.
Thanks, Shannon. Anna-Katharina, thanks for that amazing talk. And I wanted to pick your brain, or maybe you can, you did mention it already, but maybe you can rephrase it. What is the role of networks like WIOGEN to contribute to the science of tomorrow?
Yeah, I think exactly that. Science networks, science to policy networks across regions like WIOGEN, and focused around particular topics that bring environmental change processes and socio-political change processes together. In my view, that's key. It's a key instrument in enabling us as world society to come together to reflect on the interplay of these global mega trends and how they unfold, what kind of role they play in different world regions together, in order to then also advise our respective policymakers, not just informed by being by the insights from one science system, but by the insights that were produced and enriched through the dialogue between a number of different science systems, and we are all representatives of these science systems. So in that dialogue, it's also not just sort of an addition of different insights, but through the dialogue, it becomes a lot more. And I'm convinced of this, and I also just want to mention on a very sort of pragmatic manner. In the European Union has a number of funding lines in which you can only apply if you bring researchers from all over Europe together. And their logic is that they want to build a European science space. There's a lot of basically exchange enables capacity development on all sides. Learning takes place across the region, but also that Brussels can listen to advice that has been produced based on the expertise of researchers from the different country contexts much better than if it just came from Germany. If you bring a few researchers from Germany together, they go to Brussels, then the whole of Southern Europe and Eastern Europe would say, why should the Germans always determine the EU agenda? Of course, yeah, because it's not just that better knowledge translates into better politics. No, but the translation is always a negotiation of vested interests with potential winners and losers. And that comes with the responsibility that these policymakers later on have to also live up to and defend. And they can do so a lot better if they draw on advice from a number of different science systems and not just one. So this European example, that's just sort of to make it a bit more tangible for us, but that of course the same logic applies on the global scale. And WIOGEN is a network that lives this, and with this produces insights that can then be heard by UN level institutions.
Thanks, Anna-Katharina. Are there any other questions from the floor? You can raise your hand. I'm just checking the chat. There's nothing. Do you have any, because you started the network, the WIOGEN network. We're really grateful to you for developing it. And I was just wondering if you have any particular recommendations for the region as far as carrying on the network, or other recommendations to make sure that things go as well as they possibly can.
Mm-hmm. Also to how to finance a continuation, maybe. Yes. No, I mean, I realize, while, as you can tell from my answer that I just gave, I am convinced and enthusiastic about these type of joint research networks and joint research processes. And at the same time, we also know to look at it from a realistic sort of side of experience, we also know it's tough, it's hard work, yeah, and dialogue building is time intensive and competes with a number of other projects that we have to run and a number of other tasks that want to be fulfilled, and and sometimes it's very difficult to bring the research from a number of different science systems together in a way that it can actually still be heard by policymakers, yeah, and that it makes sense. And then the question of when do we feed it into which kind of a policy cycle or policy process that it's actually of relevance, yeah? Because timing is the essence basically in these processes as well. So I realize how challenging that is. And I think at the moment for WIOGEN, the UN decade poses some opportunities. There is the different laboratories now take place. A laboratory on ocean governance is organized in May next year, actually by an international advisory or group of experts. And Sebastian Unger and myself are sort of coming in from the German side. So that's planned for May. And I think that would be really excellent to have a voice, a WIOGEN voice in that lab. That still doesn't finance the network, no, but maybe for the policy advisory level that might be of relevance. I also see that while BMZ has financed WIOGEN so far, it's and has now also, of course, announced another call in the same funding line. It's not a likely continuation of that for financing the network, I assume. I mean, Rebecca Lyle will know better. I haven't looked into the funding line in detail. So I also don't have, honestly, I don't have a final answer on where funds could lie. But I do think it's the marine topics are gaining traction, and within not just the international context, but also within the German donor context. And the new government is now just starting to form itself, so we will have to see what they decide. But I do see some. I would assume that there will be possibilities coming from there. And then, of course, there's also this G7 presidency of Germany coming up next year. That's also a level where I think WIOGEN expertise would be placed well, if one links it to the scientific advisory processes of the T7, of the Think 7.
Thanks.
I mean, honestly, it's really a tough question of where can these networks be financed, because that's a problem. I mean, I just noticed that some representatives of Future Earth are amongst us. You will have your own expertise there, that it's difficult to finance across regional networks.
Well, hopefully, with these successful conferences and the publications coming on, hopefully we can at least show that there's value in the network, and hopefully that will help. So, yeah. But thank you so much for joining us today, and we have really missed you in WIOGEN, so it's wonderful to see you and to have you involved today, and we really appreciate it. Yeah, hopefully we'll see you soon and have other opportunities to work with you.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Rebecca, for the invitation. Thank you, Hauke. I mean, it's great to see all of you, and I really want to thank all of you for taking this network further and building it and making it come to fruition. It's fantastic to see.
Thanks. So we are now moving into our parallel streams again. Hauke has shared somebody has shared the links with you all in the chat. And then we'll, enjoy your separate sessions, and we'll see you again afterwards. And thank you again, Anna-Katharina.
Hi, everyone. You've come through into the wrong session. The session is over now. Please have a look at the chat box. We will close this session shortly. Please have a look at the chat box and go to the session of interest to you. Hi, everyone. Just a reminder, you are in a plenary session. The session is completed now. Please go and attend one of the parallel sessions. Hi, Jared. Can I help you? Hi, can I help you? You're on mute. I can't hear you, Jared. You're on mute. I can't hear you. There we go. Now I can hear you, Jared. Morning.
Yes, I wanted to join the session for sustainable fisheries and
Okay. They are only busy for another 20 minutes, but you can join the last session. Can you see the screen that I've shared there? So you need to go and click on the link. Do you know where you're going? Do you know how to use the chat function?
Yes.
Okay, let me see if I can. Yeah, so you have to try and open the document. Let me copy this quickly for you. So you are going into the first session. Stream 1B is the fisheries and aquaculture. Can you see that in the chat? You're on mute now again, Jared, so I can't hear you.
Yes.
Can you see it in the chat box? So you have to click that first one, but it means that you will get out of this meeting. All right, this is just the plenary meeting. There's nothing happening here now. All right.
Okay, it's okay.
Okay.
It's okay.
Okay.
Thank you so
Enjoy.
much.
Enjoy. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Shem, I see you still struggling, Jared. Can I help you? Let me see if I can unmute you. So this session will close because it will give you the option that you must leave this session and join the next one. Saeed, hopefully you can see that link there. Let me reshare it again for you guys in the chat box. You guys need to go and look at the PDF document that was circulated. All the links for the different, each session is in a different link. It's not the same link. Jared, what are you struggling with? What are you struggling with? I can't hear you, Jared. You've got to unmute yourself.